Good evening, everyone. Welcome you to another edition of Real Talk here at the First Baptist Church. We are excited that all of you guys took the opportunity to share with us on another Tuesday night in the month of February. Again, we say thank you for coming in with us on tonight. And of course, I'm here with the usual suspects. We have Sister Brianna Branch. We have Sister Miosha Crippen.
Hey, y'all.
We have Sister Brittany Stevenson.
Hi.
And then myself, Reverend Kenneth L. Watson. We are excited about the discussion on tonight for February, which of course you know is Black History Month. Tonight's topic is the importance of Black history. And we're also going to talk a little bit about that hot button topic of critical race theory. And as you all can see, we have two special guests who are with us here on this evening. The first person is Dr. Robert Mock. He is currently the Executive President and Chief of Staff at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. He has a master's in interpersonal and organizational communication and a doctorate in higher education administration from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. So can we give him a special thanks for coming and joining with us on tonight?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
And our other special guest is Dr. Marshall Stevenson, who currently is the Dean of the School of Education, Social Sciences, and the Arts at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. And he is also a professor of history. Many accomplishments, many accolades. He has researched and published articles and book chapters on Black-Jewish relations in the United States, and was the director of Dillard's University National Center for Black-Jewish Relations. He is also interfaced with such notable civil rights activists as James Farmer, also Bob Moses, also Bobby Seale of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. He's done so many things, and he currently serves as one of 18 appointed commissioners on the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So let's do a special welcome to Dr. Marshall Stevenson.
Yay.
So again, we thank you guys again for taking the time to join in with us on tonight as we again talk about the importance of Black history, and we're going to talk about critical race theory. So I want to start the discussion with you, Dr. Stevenson, if you don't mind. And can we begin to talk about why is it important for us to know our history?
Well, I think it's particularly important. All people should know their history, their heritage, where they came from. When I teach, I point out several areas that African Americans should look at. First of all, they have to look at race. They have to look at resistance. They have to look at resilience, and they have to look at their heritage and cultural identity. I like to teach around those four concepts. And once a people know who they are, they know where they need to go in terms of advancement. And so we can go all the way back to the birth of civilization was in Africa. And for so much time, much of that has been hidden. And so it's very important to understand that Black people have been at the center of world history. Black people have been at the center of American history, and they have their own unique story to tell as Black people within the diaspora all around the world. That's my simple answer.
That's a good answer.
No, that's a great answer. How do you think we're doing in reference to being good stewards of our history?
Well, I think we as a people have done a good job. There have been phases of telling our story. Beginning in the 19th century, early 19th century, there were histories that told about our accomplishments, what we did in the American Revolution, what we did in the War of 1812, newspapers that we published, our involvement in the abolitionist movement. All of this was hidden for a long time in the larger white history in the 19th century and well into the 20th century. But underneath that, Black people were telling their story. Carter G. Woodson, the father of African American history, we consider him, who, as we're talking about Black History Month, he came up with Negro History Week and created the Journal of Negro History, which is now the Journal of African American History, specifically to tell the story of Black people, which was left out of the larger discussion of American history. Since the 1960s, and as a result of the Civil Rights Movement, there's been a revolution, not only among Black historians, but a significant number of white historians who have gone back, looked in the archive, looked at the evidence, and basically debunked a lot of what the early white historians said within American history, that basically we had no place. You would look at a textbook, you might see slavery, you might see Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, that was it. But there was much more, and is much more, to the African American experience than celebrated figures. It's important now to look at the common man and woman and what they did. And so that's kind of a bottom-up grassroots history that we like to look at now.
Okay. Speaking of textbooks, right? And we'll go around the room, and then we'll end with you, Dr. Mott. What were some of your experiences like in school with being taught Black history?
That was challenging. I went to a primarily white rural school, but I will say there were some instances where we did read things like excerpts from Malcolm X's biography. I remember one experience in the 5th grade, we read Huckleberry Finn. Before we read that though, I explicitly remember my teacher saying that we would see the N-word in the book, but she did not want to hear anyone in the class repeat the N-word. That was significant. When I was a high school senior, I wrote a paper comparing and contrasting the Ku Klux Klan and the Black Panther Party.
Oh, wow.
And I still have that tucked away somewhere. I don't know where it is, but it's somewhere tucked away in a box. But that was me reaching out on my own and trying to find out about who we were as a people and what we did as a people. So basically, I would say it was limited, but on my own, I was able to begin the process, and especially once I got into undergrad and graduate school, dig up and understand what we had accomplished as a people.
Sister Miosha?
I would say, it was like very, vague for like my grade school, like through middle school. It was just, we learned about, the regulars, MLK, Rosa Parks. Mm-hmm. And then when I got to high school, I was fortunate enough to have 2 Black history teachers. And actually had a few Black teachers in high school, and they were Black. They cared about Black students. They made sure that we learned things. They were definitely good role models for us to see, and to follow. But we didn't learn a whole lot, textbook wise. They were limited to what they could actually teach us. But I know we were talking before, like we did a whole big thing about the Holocaust. Like when I was in middle school, like we learned everything about Anne Frank. We learned about the attic. We went to the Holocaust Museum. Like we did everything about the Holocaust. Germans were bad people, right? But we didn't do anywhere near that, when it came to, Black people and learning about our own Black history. So.
Yeah. Sister Brianna?
I would also agree that it was sort of like a limited experience. Like Miosha said, you learn about who they deemed the most important figures, or I guess the most memorable, like MLK and Rosa Parks when you're younger. And then I remember getting to high school and in a class where you would think it was American history, that you'd be learning about like the history of America, like all of the history of America. We kind of skipped over slavery and some of the big events surrounding that thing because we didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable, and it just, I don't know. So we didn't talk about it a lot, if any, if you were talking about it, it was because, you saw someone in the hallway and you were like, oh, it's Black History Month, I know this fact, something like that. Or someone be like, on my Snapchat, I'm doing like the Black History fact every day sort of thing. So like, add me on Snap, but that was my experience.
Sister Brittany?
So I grew up in Dew Island, Maryland. And if you go to Dew Island, Maryland now, it is 2020. They're still flying Trump flags down there. So that should tell you a little bit about the area in which I grew up in, where I went to school at. Black history was just like any other day. It was not talked about. I remember we colored like MLK pictures like in like elementary school. And the sad thing about this is I had a black like teacher when I was in like first grade. And it still wasn't something that we talked about. Even in my experience in high school, like Miosha said, now you had the teachers they were the black teachers, and they kept you in straight. They were the ones that put you aside, like, girl, get yourself together, da, 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 da. But they still had to kind of, stay in line. They couldn't, we could have conversations, but they couldn't have those conversations in class as far as teach the history that we should have been taught. So that was my experience.
Let me say this if I can. I'm actually involved in a project. It's a collaboration between UMES and Delaware State University. Delaware passed a law last year where the African American history curriculum has to be infused at a higher level when American history is taught in the 8th grade and the 11th grade. And the team is very quickly, because we're on a clock, because they want to get this curriculum in by this coming fall, looking at different areas, abolitionism. We're working on slavery right now. So there is a movement, at least in progressive states, to ensure that our story is told to a greater extent than it has been before.
Is there a reason that it's just limited to 8th and 11th graders?
Well, that's
or is that a starting point?
According to the curriculum, that's when they take history courses. They're American history courses. So when they take it, that's when they will learn this information. And one of the things I see challenging is 8th graders can only comprehend so much. So I'm like the person who critiques. And when I see some of this stuff that comes in front of me, I'm like, whoa. we got to reshape this because, 8th grade minds, they're not ready for some of this sophisticated interpretations that we have. So we're kind of struggling with that a little bit to make sure it's understandable at the age level in which the information is intended to be presented.
Well, okay. So that's the state of Delaware?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Mott?
So I have one of those 8th graders living with me. My son is in the 8th grade, and I concur with your assessment of the ability to process information, except for information that we don't want them to process. They process that very, very quickly, in fact. Let me just say that it's an honor to be before you all this evening. So I thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. But so my experience growing up with Black history was one that it was a gap. It wasn't taught in the classrooms, to be quite honest. I remember when I was in the 9th grade that we were studying the Dred Scott case. And of course, I had to be the lawyer to defend the Dred Scott case. And I remember that being one of the key elements, right, to kind of talk about it. Also, I was brought to have the opportunity to talk about the Plessy versus Ferguson case when I got to the 11th grade. And so I went to a predominantly white high school and elementary school and middle school. And so it really wasn't a part of the curriculum. But I was fortunate to have a mother that was a preschool teacher and a preschool administrator. She worked for Head Start for over 30 years. And she was an administrator. And so she made a point to make sure that me and my brother, who's 5 years younger than I, had an opportunity to learn about Black history, whether it was taught in the classroom or not. And anytime, my parents were both born in the state of Mississippi. And so anytime we would go travel to the South, that was a history lesson for us. And so although it wasn't integrated into my classroom, it was integrated into my everyday life. So I began to understand about the Great Migration and see it play out in real life, because my grandmother moved from the state of Mississippi to Illinois, where I was born and raised in Illinois. And so that very aspect of the Great Migration of all the African Americans right out of oppressive situations in the South moved to the North for better job opportunities and better employment opportunities, better educational opportunities. And so we utilized that. So it was a sort of like a living life lesson of Black history. And so I got an opportunity. My father loved sports to an enormous amount. I probably love sports a little bit too much because of him. But he utilized athletics to give me a lesson about Black history as well. So he would talk about how, he thinks the greatest boxer of all time is Muhammad Ali. His father thinks that the greatest boxer of all time was Joe Louis. And his father, my great-grandfather, thinks that it was Jack Johnson. And so you see the point. So the idea is that they utilize the accomplishments of African Americans in two different ways in my household to help educate me and my brother about the accomplishments of our people and to build in that pride. And I was so fortunate to have had the opportunity to, through my education, visit the continent of Africa on 2 different occasions. I've been to Rwanda and to Ghana both. And I never thought that it would be so emotionally overwhelming for me as a grown man in my 40s to go to Ghana and Rwanda, particularly when I got to Ghana. I didn't expect to be overwhelmed with that emotion. So I had seen Roots on TV when I was a young child, 10 years old. Oh, yeah. But to stand in the cave where they kept our people before the Inter-Passage, to hear the stories of the brutality that our people had to exhibit, and to know that on that Inter-Passage crossing to Atlantic Ocean, that today the bones of our ancestors lay decaying on the bottom of that ocean. And so I am fortunate to have an opportunity to work at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, a historically Black college and university. My first HBCU, out of all the jobs I've had, and I've been working in higher education for 25 years, it by far is the place where I can be my authentic self. And I say that because, when I have worked at other institutions, there's times where you can't be your authentic self. It's not received very well. Or if it is received, it may only be received once, and then and then we'll find something else for you to do other places. But it just never really was ingrained in our curriculum. And I was a great student coming up. I was very fortunate to have parents that held higher education in a high regard, and so education was very important to us. And I always talk about how education, going to Sunday school and going to school was exactly the same. We had a lesson and we learned about the Bible, we learned about history, we learned about reading and math, and we learned about the 10 Commandments. And so we learned to read and we learned to integrate and do those things. And it manifests itself throughout my life. And so I can't give a lot of credit to my K-12 education for learning about Black history, but I can't give it to my parents and my grandparents. And I was fortunate. My grandmother on my father's side, my Mock grandmother, she lived to be 99 years old. So, and she was like 49 years older than me. So I got a chance to have her for 50 years of my life. So I had an opportunity to feel the joy and blessing from that. And I value that. And so it's just been a wonderful journey. But thank you for this opportunity. And I hope I answered that question about how the experience was shaped.
I think it's safe to say you answered the question.
You understood the assignment as the young person.
I did the homework.
So it appears as a consensus within the room that the curriculum potentially fell short in reference to Black history, K through 12, right? Mm-hmm. So now you turn on the news and you're starting to hear this critical race theory, right? You're starting to hear that a lot. Critical race theory and how it applies to classrooms around the country. So people hear critical race theory, but I'm not exactly sure that people have kind of caught up to what exactly it is and what exactly is happening right now. So I just want to take a few moments to talk about that. And I'll lead with you, Dr. Stevenson. What is critical race theory?
Well, there's a lot of definitions. It dates back to the 70s. Kind of the godfather is the late Harvard law scholar Derek Bell. Basically, it is a framework with which we can analyze race and racism, how it implicitly and explicitly affects various social structures within the United States and around the world. So whether it be laws, policies in education, in the workplace, Bell and others saw race as the center point of how marginal people were and have been impacted in this country. Bell basically believed that race and racism would always be here, regardless of the laws that were passed, voting rights, civil rights laws. We can see today, you say Black people can vote, but yet there's gerrymandering, there's voter suppression. So those laws are limited in terms of what they can do in terms of overturning race and racism. And so the critical race theorists basically critique and criticize what we know as the liberal process of trying to overcome racism. They basically say it can't be done with laws. The entire social structure has to be reshaped, reformed, and particularly looking at the stories of marginalized people. We have a different reality than other people have, and they can only go so far in terms of understanding our reality. They don't know what it's like to be racially profiled, for example. They don't know what it's like once you get in the legal system, how in terms of incarceration, how it's disproportionately Black people and Latino people that are in the prisons because the laws all the way up to Supreme Court decisions have been in opposition to where Black people stand in this society. And again, not only do you have critical race theory, it's been broken down into disability theory, Asian critical race theory, Latino, all of these different groups now, where they fit into society, they're challenging the norms that the dominant culture and the dominant society have imposed on them. So in a way, it's a reaction to a whole history of oppression. And it's a power dynamic in terms of whose story are we going to listen to? You know, whose reality are we going to deal with and try to understand? And for white Americans, the dominant group, they see from their worldview that because these laws were passed, there really isn't a problem. You had a Black president, you do have Black elected officials, you have Black entertainers, what more do you folk want? The laws have done away with everything, but that's not true. We see every day the issues that we're dealing with here. I mean, we have an issue within the last couple of weeks. The former coach of the Miami Dolphins, Brian Flores, he dropped it in terms of the lack of Black coaches in the NFL and how it primarily is an old boys network. And I just read something that many of the defensive coaches and the other kinds of coaches are related from a family standpoint to many of the owners. It really is an old boys network, and it's hard for Black people to break in. We see the debate now. President Biden has said the next Supreme Court justice will be a Black female. Oh my goodness. That is like, for the dominant society, that's like, wait a minute, how can you say that? That's, you're practicing affirmative action, and it's unfair to the white candidates that might be of equal, ability. So race is not going anywhere. We're going to continue to debate and argue back and forth in terms of where our place should be in American society.
That was good. So I'll open up this for some slight discussion among the room. It's like, so what do we think, or what do you like, what comes through your mind when you hear about Florida State Board of Education has banned critical race theory from public school classrooms, saying that they want to shield school children from a curriculum that could distort historical events? Like, what do you feel when you hear about Florida? How they have a bill that bans businesses and schools from making anyone feel guilty about race. Like, how do you feel when the Mississippi State Senate has just passed a bill to ban critical race theory from being taught in school? And I'll start with Dr. Mock. Like how should we feel? How do you feel? And what role should critical race theory play today in our society?
So the short answer is sad. It's sad that it's that strong of a reaction that people feel like the need to put a law in place to try to prevent someone from learning about a theory, right? Because all it is a theory. We're not even saying that it's complete fact. We're just saying it's a theory. So I think it's really sad that people don't have the opportunity to learn about a theory. But how it plays out today, I'm glad you brought up the example about Mr. Brian Flores. You think about just most recently, in the Summer Olympic Games, Shakira Richardson was given the door and not the opportunity to compete in the 100 meters or the 4x100 meters and in the 200 meter dash. And she's probably the fastest African-American woman that we had at the time. So she's totally unable to compete in the Olympics. Yet, we have a 15-year-old white Russian athlete, a minor, who has done very, very well on the ice and tested positive for a banned substance. And yet, not only did they not remove her from the Olympics, but they're going to let her compete some more. Yeah. So that's a perfect example how we live in a different world, right?
Double standards.
In one case, the black person can't even compete. In the other case, this Russian young lady, who happens to be white, of course, is given an opportunity not just to compete, but to continue competing. And so that continues to play itself out. And we see how we sort of live in two different Americas. So let me go back to the 1990s, right? There was a time when a person that was caught with powder cocaine would get less jail time than a person, African Americans typically, who got caught with crack cocaine. So you see how it's two different, like, wait a minute, you need powder to make the crack. And yet the crack cocaine dealer got more time for it. And so now today, and we had a war on drugs, right? So that's felt very much like it was an attack on African Americans. So that's how critical race theory plays itself out in the real world. How does it play out when you go to court? How does it play out when you go to the justice system? And so those are two examples how we sort of live in two different worlds. And then that manifests itself and builds on other things in socioeconomic ways. So if Shakira Richardson can't compete in the Olympics, then guess what? She'll have fewer commercials. She'll be less marketable. She'll make less money. And then therefore her family will have less wealth to pass down. Well, if you happen to be the Russian skater, you're going to have plenty of opportunities to make commercials, to do other things, to generate revenue for your family and for your livelihood. And so that's how it translates into socioeconomic status. So it really plays itself out. So I think it's really sad. It feels like another impediment to reduce African Americans the opportunity to grow and to develop. But we have always found a way to ride and to help pull the person up that's behind us, despite the circumstances that lay before us. Because remember, I said about 35 minutes ago, our ancestors crossed that Indo Passage and some of their bones still lay on the Atlantic Ocean. And so we're still able to survive, even with those impediments. So God will make a way and we'll find a way out of this too.
Mm-hmm. So if I could just follow up just a little bit with what Dr. Mock said, we see the same situation today in terms of a double standard. The majority of individuals hooked on opioids, that became a big deal for the larger white population. All kind of laws, all kind of help.
What?
You know,
help.
When it was black people, oh, well, look at them, they're drug addicts, who cares? So it depends on who's in control and who's impacted in terms of what the government or whomever is going to reach out to help.
Correct. Who controls the narrative? See, when it was crack, it's a war on drugs.
Yeah.
But when it was opioids, it's a sickness, it's an illness.
Yes.
You need help.
Like diabetes.
Right, it's like diabetes, right? Or
Like,
heart disease.
what? On the radio. It was on the radio.
I did hear
I
that.
couldn't
Like,
even believe it.
Yeah,
couldn't even
because-
believe it.
yeah.
I still get frustrated. I still get frustrated by it.
That's the reason why I don't listen to the radio.
So literally, the moment that the Republican governor of Virginia stepped into office, Glenn Youngkin, one of the first things he did was sign an executive order designed to root out critical race theory from the state of Virginia's educational system. So why do you think that, or why has critical race theory begun to gain so much traction in today's society now?
Well, I think it's again a reaction to reality. I mean, the theory itself, from a sociological standpoint, the way it would be taught, K through 12 can't process. I have a difficult time when I read the material trying to digest it, let alone saying that it's being taught in the elementary and high schools. It is not. And so, as I said, it's a reaction against reality. And I see it in some ways as the laws that were passed during slavery that prohibited blacks to learn how to read and write. In its own way, it's the same kind of thing. And I know you talk about Florida. There was a situation where a school teacher was going to give a presentation on the history of the civil rights movement. They shut him down, even though when they looked at the prospectus, it didn't say anything about critical race theory. It simply was a history of the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and all of that. It didn't, but when people hear the word race, the antennas and the flags go up. And there's a defensive reaction of, well, I didn't do that. That was several generations ago. Why should I pay the price for what my great grandfather did? He didn't know any better when he enslaved black people, So why should we pay the price now? Well, racism still exists all across the board, whether it's a legal system, the educational system, whether it's in employment, it's there, but people don't want to realize it. Again, it goes back to, well, everywhere you look, there's black people doing things. So, what do you mean there's a problem?
Well put.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. Anybody have anything to add while we're here?
Could you repeat the question?
With critical race theory?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
No, we were kind of talking about like what role it plays and why has critical race theory gained so much traction in today's society. But that was a well put answer by Dr. Stevenson in reference to why it has.
Yeah. I think also when you think about it, we, the generations, my generation, the generations after me, they're more socially involved in certain things, and they want to know. I get on TikTok and there are 15 and 16-year-olds that can debate, certain things about racism and about the history of racism and things like that more than people older than me, because they want to know. They don't see it as, oh, it's bad. They see it as it's a part of history that we want to change. We don't want to go back to 60, 70 years ago when, black people couldn't vote and when black people were being lynched and murdered and just all kinds of things. We want to know what happened so that we don't repeat it again. So I think that also could be a reason why critical race theory now is such a topic, because people, while the parents don't want the kids to know. And like Dr. Stevenson said, I can agree, because I remember when we were talking about it, we were trying to find a definition of it. And we were like, okay, let's see if does this definition make sense to us? So, I mean, it is challenging, but I think there are ways that race and, the history of race and those things can be taught whereby it would be age appropriate. But the reason why they don't want it taught is because they don't want that history to, come to earth. They don't want people to realize just how bad things were, because, you know, slavery was good. You know, of course the Black people wanted to be slaves. Why wouldn't they? You know, it's kind of the way they want it to sound when it's like, you took us from our homeland where we were kings and queens and things like that, and then you wanted us to come work in your field. So I feel like that's probably another reason why, you know, to answer the question,
if I could just interject, I'm gonna hold up this book. I don't know if you can see all of it. It's called Critical Race Theory by Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanson. Delgado is one of the fathers of critical race theory. It's not all that thick, but if you want to get a book that kind of breaks it down, this is one that I would suggest that you get.
Is that the I don't mean to sound, is that a version that the people who might have a little harder time comprehending, that's not the doctorate level version, that's kind of like the undergraduate level?
Guess what? Like I said, I've had to read through this several times. I have it marked here on those areas I have to go back and try to digest, because it's very deep, but I think it'll do you good to at least get some basic knowledge of the history, how it was formulated, and where it is today, because it talks about people who criticized it, people even within the movement, they call them Crips, not Crips, Crips. The people who, you know, support this particular theory and are engaged in the research around it. So anyway.
Okay. I'm glad you said that, Brittany, about the young people today, because see, those young people also saw live on TV in real time George Floyd lose his life. Mm-hmm. It's not a movie. They saw that in real time. Him begging thousands of times over for I can't breathe, you know, and people asking him on the sidewalk, please get off of his neck. And yet still sucked the life out of him right there. And I think that was shown throughout the world. So unlike 50 years ago, where you had to wait for the movie or wait for the story or wait for the magazine to cover it, they got it right there live with their cell phones, videotaping, where no one can deny the pain and the suffering that we saw right there happen. So it was a modern day lynching. And so that impacted people. And, you know, people will suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder because they've been triggered by that very event. And that has caused a lot of that activism that Brittany was talking about earlier. And I think that people, they just can't unsee it. They cannot unsee it.
Yeah, you can't, you really can't unsee that.
Mm-hmm.
No,
I still haven't seen the full video of it, because like just watching parts of it, it literally is.
I can't watch it. People are like, did you? No.
It's painful. It's painful. It's emotionally painful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a situation now, very same city in Minneapolis, a young man by the name of Amir Locke, who was gunned down by the police. You know, so I mean, it continues to happen, unfortunately. And, you know, we're going to have to stay vigilant in terms of overturning those no-knock laws and things like that. You know, Breonna Taylor, the way she was murdered. We still confront this every day, you know. Yeah.
And the young guy that had the automatic weapon, who was waving in the military truck.
Kyle Rittenhouse.
Meanwhile, he gets off the hook.
And he's off, yeah.
And he's like on podcasts and stuff like that. And now he wants the gun back because he said he wants to destroy it.
Correct.
Yeah, that was crazy.
That's the difference, you know, because if you would have put a person of color there standing with their weapon,
standing, he'd been dead.
They would have got blown away.
He's
been over.
They wouldn't even had a chance to put their hands up. They've been shot.
So my question for the group, right? So in spite of all the PTSD that all of us as a people have to experience and encounter, deal with, how do we remain vigilant in reference to what we believe and being more informed about our history and kind of like next steps? What does that look like?
Well, I think, you know, it was never really intended for us to be a part of American society. We were brought here as slaves. And I just jotted something down. If you take the dates from 1619 to 1865, when the 13th Amendment was passed, that's 246 years. If you start from 1865 and the 13th Amendment to today, that's 157 years. So we have still been within a history of bondage more than we had freedom. But within the time period of freedom, we're still struggling. But just like during the period of slavery, you had your Nat Turners, you had your Harriet Tubmans and Soldiers of Truth who resisted, and we have to resist today. I'm not saying they saw violent. That was the only thing, that they saw that they could get out, of the oppression that they suffered. But I think we have to continue to use the legal system. We need to protest. We need to educate our youth about our history, and that it's important to keep it front and center what Black people did in this country and what we continue to do. If Black people hadn't put in the work, this country would not be where it is today. That's just the bottom line. You can talk about Wall Street in New York. Enslaved people built the wall for Wall Street. Many of the corporations today, the clothing, Brooks Brothers, well, they gained their wealth from the cotton that Black people picked. Domino Sugar from the sugarcane plantation. So all these corporations that today have generated this wealth, the roots of the wealth go back to the labor of Black people. So to say that we are not intimately intertwined with the history of this country, probably more so than obviously is to be admitted at this point in time.
That was good.
I think one of the things that's important is for us to recognize that it's not just us alone. And I'm glad you talked about the slave trade and how we helped rise out of that. But we had white brothers and sisters, red brothers and sisters, European American brothers and sisters that helped rise us out of that situation. Because see, without the help of all of those other races, we couldn't change our oppressive situation. We didn't have the power. Otherwise, we would have only been in slavery for 15 minutes, but we couldn't. And so we needed assistance from other ethnicities, other nationalities, other races. And together, we were able to pull ourselves out of that circumstance. See, President Obama was not elected by just Black people. He couldn't. There wasn't enough of them.
You're right.
So that's the point. I think that we need to. So we needed everybody. We needed people of all different on that whole diaspora, from light white all the way to extra dark, right? On that whole diaspora to be able to help us rise out of our circumstances. And we have to be very fortunate to have people in our lives that don't see us just as a person of color, but see us as a whole human being, a Christian body, a person that has a spirit, a life, and a soul that has value, so that Black lives matter, just like the other lives matter.
That's a great point. How do we balance self-empowerment, potentially working together? How do we balance self-empowerment versus waiting on another race to always help us do something?
Well, I can speak to that specifically, since most of my research has been around Black-Jewish relations. And there's always been this comparison between the Jewish experience and the Black experience to a certain extent relative to the same kinds of prejudice and discrimination that they face. Couldn't go to Harvard for a long period of time, blackballed out of various occupations. Many wealthy Jewish people gained their money from being rag pickers because nobody scrapped metal. Nobody else wanted to do it. Nobody wanted to, and I'm not saying they dominated. That's what some of the stereotypes are today, that they dominated these industries. But they took advantage, like in Hollywood, filmmaking. A lot of people white Gentiles who said, oh, this will never be anything. They were able to move in and make something of those industries. There has been a conflict between the two groups, but there's also been an alliance between the two groups. If you look at a lot of the civil rights laws and legislation, Jewish organizations signed on amicus curiae briefs. Okay, so the experience between blacks and Jews has been very intimate. It hasn't always been lovey-dovey, but that's one relationship where you can look at another group of people because of their own experience who could sympathize, empathize, and were on the front line in terms of assisting black people gain their freedom. And we see today, look at the anti-Semitism that's rampant. Look what happened down in Texas. You know, so it's still there, this conception, you know, that Jews are a threat. Jews are part of a world conspiracy. They want to take over. You get the Elders of the Protocol of Zion, which was a forgery that basically said there was this Jewish cabal that was specifically organized to take over the world. So there's still, you go on the website and look at the Aryan Nation and all, they're still peddling this kind of stuff. So just as much as there is racism against African Americans, you still see it against Jews as well. It's alive and well.
It is. I used to have this discussion with a Jewish friend of mine, and here it's a little different. Is that when a person, some people that are of Jewish nationality and or heritage, when they walk in the room, you may not know they're Jewish. Unless they announce to the room that they're Jewish. Mm-hmm. Every room I walk in is very clear that I'm African.
Yeah.
You a black
so
man.
what I'm saying is, you can some people of Jewish heritage and faith can blend into white society with no opportunity to be discriminated against. But I can never ever walk into a circumstance where I can blend in, because clearly they're going to see, oh, that's an African American when they walk. I'm not saying all, because they have a whole diaspora of people that are of the Jewish faith and the Jewish nationality as well. So, and that's what the whole Plessy versus Ferguson case was about, right? An African American guy trying to ride a train, and he said, well, you got to get to the back. You black. He said, well, I'm not black. What do you mean? I'm only 1/8 black. Well, let's go to the Supreme Court and find out. And then they made a decision, and that's where that statement comes from. If you got one drop of black blood,
one drop rule.
That's right. And see, that goes back to slavery, because if the master raped the slave that he owned, it produced a child that was of his and hers. Well, still a slave though, because he needed that labor to work in the field or work in the house. So it's sad. Sad, tough history.
So great discussion. As we are about to wrap up, again, we certainly thank you, Dr. Mock. We thank you, Dr. Stevenson, for your contributions on tonight. Before we end, we'll close out with this. How can we become, or what resources are available to help us become more informed, to help us educate our youth, our young people more when it comes to our history? And then you can also provide closing thoughts.
Well, I'll go first. One thing I would suggest is two things. Go to the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. And you may have to go multiple times because it's so big. Mm-hmm. It's so grandiose. There's so many levels and so much in it. It is a enormous attempt to wrap the accomplishments and the pain and the suffering and the history of African Americans in one enormous facility. So I would suggest anyone get the opportunity to go there. The second thing is to utilize the most powerful element that's been created in a long time, and that is the internet. There's information right out there for you to acquire. You can get library books, you can get journal articles, you can read text. It's all right out there for you. I grew up at a time where there was no internet, and I used to look in the World Book Encyclopedia and really thought that was a big deal. But now You got the internet. My gosh, utilize that resource that's there for you. Thank you. My 2 points.
I would agree with Dr. Mock. One of the things I would recommend to people, and they may say, oh, that's too studious or whatever, is there are plenty of African American history textbooks that are out there. 2 that I would recommend. One of the first was written by one Lerone Bennett, who was an editor of Ebony Magazine, who wrote a book called Before the Mayflower. And it's somewhat dated. At this point, it's 1619 to 1962, but it still covers a lot of history about the Black experience. Another book is called From Slavery to Freedom, written by the late John Hope Franklin. That book came out in 1947. It's gone through about 12 editions now. I had the pleasure of critiquing the 7th edition. That gives you a basic history of the African American experience. And John Hope Franklin's perspective was how much we contributed to the American story. You could not tell American history without talking about the contributions that Black people made. So there are plenty of textbooks out there. I know that might be boring to people, more boring than the internet. But as Dr. Mock said, there's museums, there's state museums. I mean, in Maryland here, we have the Harriet Tubman Museum. We have a lot of stuff that's out there now that has developed over the last 20, 30, 40 years.
They should get a Snapchat channel with all of that history. That would make sure all the kids would see it because they would love it. They should do that. Someone should do that. Like get some snaps. I feel like that would be a good idea.
Probably not even Snap anymore though. It'd have to be TikTok. That's where everybody is.
TikTok.
That's where everybody is.
Sister Brittany,
just start one.
Sister Brittany, you shared with us a calendar. Do you remember that? The calendar you shared with us?
Yes, I took it, Dr. Stevenson. The calendars that were on the
the Equal Justice, the EJI calendars.
Yes, I got one. I remember.
I have some of those. I took one, and I know I had showed it to them when we had our last meeting, and they were like, "Oh, we want one." So that's a wealth of knowledge because there's something on each and every day. Those 365 days of history. So. Yeah.
And again, that's another reference. The EJI, Brian Stevenson, his whole movement. There's a museum in Alabama that documents 4,000, 5,000 lynchings that took place over, roughly 100-year period. I'm on this commission where we're just looking at the lynchings in the state of Maryland. And we have 44 documented. We know there were more, but the last documented one, George Armwood, and Brittany knows this, took place. I'm pointing out of my window at UMES, just right up the street here, where it took place in front of the courthouse, drug him out of the police station that's still sitting there, burned his body, and left it in front of the True Value hardware store down there.
Correct.
Okay. So, I mean, it's still a lot of stuff out there, and folk, they still don't want to deal with it. They think, well, that was back then. What does it have to do with now? Well, it has a lot to do with now.
It plays a part now.
Look, we got racial terror now. Look at the HBCU bomb threats.
Oh, yeah.
It's racial terror. I mean, apparently they had one at Fisk University yesterday. So whether it's a lynching or whether it's a bomb threat, Black people are still, their institutions as well, not only as individuals, but their institutions are still targeted because people realize that they're temples of power. That's what they represent, just like the church. The church, the center of the movement, what Dr. Mock said, it wasn't just, the Bible. The churches were where we learned everything. The churches is where we talked about politics and voting rights and things of that nature. So the church has been the center of any kind of civil rights struggle that has taken place in this country. So let me slow down.
Listen, that was a good place to stop. Again, ladies, let's give Dr. Mock and Dr. Stevenson a big
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
We
And
could go
listen,
on for this for like hours. This could be
Yeah,
like
this is
hours.
a hot topic,
Oh, yeah.
and we could literally,
I
we
mean,
try
we
to
could
keep
talk
our
about it
sessions.
Ever. There could be different parts. Part
We're gonna
one,
have to-
part two, part
we're gonna
80.
have to bring you guys back. But before we end tonight, we always end with what we call a quick fire question. Okay, just to keep things a little light. Okay, because we talked about some heavy stuff on tonight. Very informative, extremely relevant. But we're going to do a quick fire. Dr. Mock, Dr. Stevenson, you're certainly welcome to answer it if you want, or you can simply pass. The quick fire question on tonight for us is real simple because I didn't have to think about it. I just came up with it.
Well,
I
I'm glad.
pass.
You can't give up already, Dr. Mike.
Think about it. It would have been 5 minutes.
No, it's fun. There's no right or wrong answer. It's your opinion. What is everybody, since we're celebrating February, it's Black History Month, everybody let's go around the room real quickly and just give your favorite Black movie of all time.
Oh,
How did you
God.
say that? That's
That's too much.
Give it to me real quick
Color Purple.
and summarize why, briefly.
You so hot full of beat.
I love the Color Purple, even though, and to this day, Color Purple, I'm gonna start. Color Purple is mine. To this day, I cannot stand Danny Glover for how he treated Sis Neely. I know he was playing a role. I can't do nothing with it, but Color Purple is mine. I will watch the Color Purple now, like I've never seen it, and be sitting there like, oh my God, and then don't get to the end when they're in the field and they're my sister. Oh, I will be crying, and I'm not a crier, so the fact that so Color Purple.
Color Purple. All right, who's next?
there's too many. My brain is not happy here.
It's a lot.
Okay.
I didn't know that was going to be your question, but I did wear my shirt, one time for the culture, because this movie for young people, like when we were growing up, Poetic Justice. That did it for us, that did it for us young people. But Color Purple for sure, and I absolutely love Life. I could watch that movie 500,000 times. You hear me? Like, Ryan Lawrence and all.
That is a killer combination.
All right, who's that?
I
Who's
love
next?
the movie.
Sister Brianna, Dr. Mock, Dr. Stevenson, you have anything to contribute?
Well, I said earlier, it's not a movie, it's a series, but Roots. It shaped the whole country. It shaped the whole country. I mean, the whole country was mesmerized when Roots was on. And I was a child, only like 10 years old when it happened. But I remember us talking about it every day in school. It's like it transformed time. So I know it's not one movie, it's a series, but
Well, still.
Okay. All right.
Okay. I think I have a movie. It's not like, older. It's the first one that popped in my head. I'm going to go with Girls Trip, okay? Because it is successful. They are successful Black women, and they are funny, and they have this group that supports each other. They love each other, they hold each other up. And it's just the time, who wouldn't want a friend group that's that exciting?
And go to
you, who are going to support you. What? Okay, that's what we're
That's a good one, though. I love that movie.
Dr. Stevenson, close us out. What is it?
Okay, well, I'm going to point to a historical one that I've seen.
Is it your favorite?
Probably not my favorite, but because I'm drawing a blank on what my favorite. But let me give you an important historical one. Judas and the Black Messiah.
Oh, it's a great
Which,
one.
if you saw that, about the life of Fred Hampton. Very, very powerful movie. To piggyback off of Dr. Mock, the documentary Eyes on the Prize. That was very significant in the 1980s and 90s to talk about the civil rights movement. So that's another important one. Muhammad Ali,
that was a good one.
Will Smith.
Love him.
That's good. Yeah.
There's a lot of them out there. Of course, there's the comedies and other kinds of things, you know.
When you
So
say
it's a
comedy, the
lot.
one that comes to my mind is Coming to America. That is like,
Yeah, there you go.
Was that yours, Kenny? That's yours?
Yes.
Coming to America.
You waited too long.
The significance of coming to America. Yes.
Eddie
Listen,
Murphy was in that too. He's one of the greats.
we gotta go. Thank you, Dr. Mott. Thank you, Dr. Stevenson.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank
So much.
you.
Hope Pride for real. We love to see it.
Britt, we're
Okay,
out.
take
Next
care.
time.
Have a good night.